The very first Democratic presidential debate is less than 2 months away, right here on NBC. And with the entry of Joe Biden, it is crazy to consider as many as 20 candidates could be on stage over the course of those 2 nights vying for the party's nomination. Those debates will be the first big opportunity to really shape the race and move voters from one candidate to another. Right now, the 2 people with the broadest name recognition are the frontrunners, but the majority of voters have not made up their minds yet. One of the contenders we haven't gotten a chance to speak to since announcing his candidacy back in February is Senator Cory Booker, and Senator Booker joins me now. Senator, it is great to have you. You've spoken a lot about your sort of moral vision for America and faith as well. And I wonder, when you look at what happened in San Diego, what happened in Christchurch, what happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue, how you think about the relationship between that and the way the president talks about Muslims and speaks more broadly.
Well, we know what we have in him now. It's no illusions, from his failure to condemn white Nazis marching in Virginia, to even the way he seems to have different standards for different groups in America, the way he talks about African Americans, the way he talks about women, and clearly the language he's had from shithole countries to you name it, that has in many ways been contributing to what we see as a rise in hate crimes. But I think there's something even deeper going on than just about him. And I worry about a Democratic Party that makes this all about one guy in one office, when we don't pay attention to the deeper tribalism in our country, the urgent needs for moral, grace and decency and healing in our country. Because a lot of the problems I deal with in my, I live in an inner city neighborhood that's at and below the poverty line, black and brown community. A lot of the challenges we have, to me, are a subject of a lack of empathy for the pain and struggling going on with so many. I've said many times, the opposite of justice is not only injustice, it's also apathy, indifference, and inaction. And we as a country need to have that revival of grace and empathy so that we can begin to come together and deal with the persistent injustices that were existing even before Donald Trump.
What does that mean, though, as politics, right? I mean, as a sort of spiritual calling or a community calling, I can hear that. But what does that actually mean in politics, given the structural realities of the way that American politics works at this moment?
Well, to me, it's very clear. Look, I always say patriotism is love of country, and you can't love your country unless you love your fellow countrymen and women. And love is not a sentiment. It's not a feeling. It's sacrifice. It's struggle. And when your kids don't have access to clean water, when someone else's kids don't have access to clean water, it's a threat to your children. Your children are going to be bereft of their genius, of their artistry, of their successes. And so what I say is that in policy, it's creating that beloved community that we think that if you're an American, we are invested in each other. Therefore, you have a right to clean water, a right to health care, that you should have jobs that pay a living wage so your family doesn't get evicted every few months because you can't meet basic rental payments. And so, there's a person I respect that once said, what does love look like in public? It's justice. And the fact that we have so many Americans struggling, like I live in a community with 2 Superfund sites right around us, as many low-income Americans do, as many African Americans do. And the fact that we don't have an urgency when we now have longitudinal data that shows that children born around Superfund sites have dramatically higher rates of birth defects, dramatically higher rates of autism. And so for us to not have a sense of common purpose to deal with these injustices, that is a tangible policy problem.
But isn't there, but that analysis seems to allied a description of where power is, right? I mean, there seems like 2 things happening in America. One is that there's certain people who don't want to be in community with you, Cory Booker, or others, right? I mean, there's some divide about what, who the country is for and who gets to call it. But there's also powerful interests that don't necessarily want to have their Superfund site cleaned up.
Yeah, but look, I've seen throughout our history, we cannot forget the instruction of history. We know that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. When we have leaders, and I mean lots of leaders, that can expand the moral imagination of our country. We've seen demagoguery. We've seen hate before. How did we beat Bull Connor? By bringing bigger fire hoses and bigger dogs, or by doing the kind of protest, the kind of demand that expanded the moral imagination of the whole country, got people off their couch in New Jersey, in New York, in Iowa, and got them to get on buses and do freedom rides or join marches. We are at a moment right now where the poverty that really is the biggest threat to our country is not the material poverty, which is a sin in society, but the poverty of compassion, the poverty of empathy. And we need leadership that doesn't just condemn the minority minority of our country that might be doing bad things, but awakens the consciousness of the majority of our country to get good things happening in our country when good people come together and act on behalf of the whole.
Is that your theory of why Cory Booker should be the president of the United States at this moment?
Look, I'm going to tell everybody that we cannot be in a moment where we're looking for one savior to get rid of one guy from office. This cannot be about one election. It's got to be about a larger campaign, because if we get rid of Donald Trump and put a really great person in and then go back to what we were doing in the 2012, 13, 14, the problems in my inner city neighborhood are still going to be there. I'm running for president not just for an office and one election, but because I want to awaken a moral movement in this country again, where we begin to see the suffering and the inadequacies of our country that's hurting people in farm town and factory towns and inner cities, where we can be the nation who we say we are, a nation of liberty and justice for all. That's the kind of leadership I'm interested in providing for America. Not that everybody looks to me for leadership, that ignites the leadership, the activism, the engagement of the whole.
What is the proof of concept for that being successful? Like, if a cynic says to you, look, Mitch, I have seen Mitch McConnell. I know the way that the polarized politics work. I know there's a filibuster. All that sounds nice, but show me where that works.
Well, look, I'm the guy that led with Dick Durbin on the Senate side the criminal justice reform bill, the only major bipartisan bill that got passed under this president that liberated people in communities like mine that have been waiting for criminal justice reform since 1980, when our prison population started going up about 500%. I'm the guy in Newark, New Jersey that brought together unusual coalitions to produce unusual results. And now if you're a black kid in Newark, your chances of going to a school that beats suburban schools went up 400%. I've had a career of people telling me what I couldn't do in positions of leadership, and my counter to them is, well, watch what we do together to counter people's cynical beliefs and really ignoring American history, which is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible when good people come together and demand the consciousness of the whole.
What would be your first priority as president of the United States? Let's say you're elected, and let's say the Democrats were to take the House and the Senate. So you have a teed-up domestic policy legislative. You get to move one big bill first. What's the first bill? Well,
you say my first priority. If I get elected in November, I'm not waiting until January to turn to the Democratic Party and say enough already. We need to go back to being a 50-state party. Texas is a blue state. Georgia is a blue state. And the next time minority communities, Latino, Black, next time low-income communities should see people coming into their neighborhoods should not be when we're next asking for a vote in 2022. I'm going to be elected. I'm going to be the leader of a party that's not interested in defining itself as beating Republicans, but it's going to define itself by uniting Americans for the cause of justice. And we're going to start building in the grassroots, because that's how you win. And so I understand that I have a legislative agenda. We're going to start doing things from just common sense things, from raising the minimum wage to rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. I can give you a lot of things we can do, and many of them I can do with the stroke of a pen and not have to wait for even Congress. But this has got to be understanding that this is a moral moment. This next election is going to affect the next generation of Americans. And we've lost something. We've become a society where people mistake wealth for worth, celebrity for significance, where folks are struggling for a sense of meaning in their communities and feel like they've lost that sense of community. And so this is a great country from our history and from the kind of things we've done to beat demagogues. And look, you know the history. There's an entire political party once that was about anti-immigration called the Know Nothings. And every time those demagogues fell, when we created larger, more rainbow coalitions that have helped our country get back on track to see each other, to see the vulnerable, to see the left behind, to see the left out, and reaffirms our common bonds to each other. Enough of this deep tribalism that's getting worse and worse in our country. We need leadership that's going to start talking about our common bonds, our common pain, and return us to a sense of common purpose.
I want to ask you a final question about a piece that was on today in New York Magazine. It was called "Wall Street Democrats Are Absolutely Freaking Out About Their 2020 Candidates." It was expressing some consternation among folks on Wall Street. They're worried about Bernie Sanders. They're worried about Elizabeth Warren. Is it good or bad if Wall Street's freaking out about Democratic candidates?
You know, look, again, I think that headlines like that are distractions. They're distractions from the purpose we need to do, which is to have a tax code that reflects our values. Should people who work for hedge funds have to pay less of a percentage of their income in taxes than people who teach our children in public schools? I think when you step back and start talking about a moral economy, that a lot of the things that we have right now just don't hold. And by the way, when you start talking about a moral economy that empowers struggling families, empowers seniors who are trying to retire with security, I think those are actually unifying themes where you're going to find folks who often get painted with broad brushes who buy into that. You might be surprised when King talked with a moral voice, when Susan B. Anthony talked with a moral voice. They created unusual coalitions that ultimately produced the unusual results. We, again, need to be a party that states clearly what our values are and our standards are, and then calls the whole country together to support those values. We are in the majority, those people who want an economy that is a moral economy. We are in the majority, those of us who believe in health care and great public education being a right. It's about time we start talking and leading with our values and calling America to come together around them. And those people left out on the margins, we will either leave them behind or they'll eventually join us.
All right, Senator Cory Booker, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate, senator from New Jersey. Thank you for making time.
Thank you, sir.
Now, hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.